Imagine being trapped inside a giant steel tube, hundreds of meters below the ocean's surface. Around you, the temperature spikes past 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is becoming so scarce that your lungs burn with every attempt to breathe. The crew next to you is fainting from exhaustion and dehydration. To make matters worse, violent explosions violently rock the metal walls of your submarine. Out there, above the water, the greatest military power on the planet is hunting you down. You are completely isolated from the rest of the Earth. No radio, no internet, no messages from Berlin or Moscow. The last news you received stated that the world was on the brink of nuclear war. And now, right in front of you, lies a control panel. You hold the key to launching a torpedo equipped with a nuclear warhead equivalent to the Hiroshima bomb. The captain gives the order, fire. The political officer agrees. The fate of humanity depends exclusively on you. Saying yes means the end of civilization. Saying no means defying your own superiors in the middle of an underwater hell. What would you do? This is not the synopsis of a sci-fi movie or a Hollywood thriller. This actually happened. The date was October 27, 1962. The location, the Caribbean Sea. And the man who changed the course of human history was named Vasily Arkhipov. This is the inside story of the incident involving the Soviet submarine B-59, the most dangerous moment in human history, when World War III almost began in the silence of the deep sea. To understand how the world ended up in the anteroom of the apocalypse, we need to step back in time. October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis was at its absolute peak. American spy planes had discovered that the Soviet Union, led by Nikita Khrushchev, was installing medium and long-range nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. For American President John F. Kennedy, this was an intolerable red line. If those missiles became operational, Moscow could destroy major U.S. cities in a matter of minutes without any chance of retaliation. Kennedy's response was drastic. He ordered a naval quarantine, essentially a military blockade around Cuba. Any ship or submarine attempting to cross that line would be intercepted by American forces. The world held its breath. American bombers loaded with nuclear weapons were in the air 24 hours a day. The Soviet military was on maximum alert. A single miscalculation, a single spark, and the planet would burn. But what the American government and the Pentagon did not know was that long before the blockade was announced, the Soviet Navy had already dispatched a secret group to the Caribbean. 4 Foxtrot-class attack submarines had departed from the ultra-secret base of Sitaguba in the Arctic Circle. Their code names were B-4, B-36, B-130, and the protagonist of our story, the B-59. Their mission was secret and desperate: break through the American lines and reach Cuba to protect Soviet interests. But there was a crucial detail that remained an absolute secret for decades. Each of these 4 submarines carried a special weapon, a torpedo armed with a 10-kiloton tactical nuclear warhead. To put that into perspective, the power of that weapon was comparable to the bomb that devastated Hiroshima in 1945. And the orders given to the captains before deployment were ambiguous. They had permission to use the nuclear weapon if the submarine was attacked or if its integrity was in grave danger, provided there was unanimous approval from the senior officers on board. The journey to the Caribbean was a technical nightmare. Foxtrot-class submarines were designed for the freezing waters of the Arctic, not the tropical heat of the Caribbean. Very quickly, the B-59's air conditioning systems failed. The internal temperature began to rise alarmingly, hitting 50 degrees Celsius in the main compartments and up to 60 degrees 140 degrees Fahrenheit in the engine room. Humidity was near 100%. Sailors worked wearing nothing but underwear, drenched in sweat, rationing water that was already contaminated and brackish. To make things worse, to recharge their electric batteries, the submarines needed to surface periodically to run their diesel engines. And it was precisely during one of these maneuvers, on the night of October 27th, that destiny knocked on the B-59's door. The United States Navy possessed the most advanced sonar system in the world and knew there was Soviet activity in the region. A massive task force, led by the aircraft carrier USS Randolph and accompanied by 11 destroyers, located the B-59. The Americans did not know the submarine carried a nuclear weapon, They believed it was just a conventional submarine trying to breach the blockade. To force the submarine to surface and identify itself, the American ships began dropping signaling depth charges. These were small explosives designed to make noise and alert the submarine, not to destroy it. But down below, inside the iron hull of the B-59, the sound was deafening. Each explosion felt like a giant sledgehammer slamming against the metal. The lighting failed, leaving the crew in the dim glow of red emergency lights. Oxygen was running out. Carbon dioxide levels were dangerously high, causing the men to become disoriented, confused, and paranoid. For the captain of the B-59, Valentin Savitsky, the worst-case scenario had materialized. He had been without communication with Moscow for days. The radio could not pick up transmissions from the Soviet Union at that depth. He heard the constant explosions above him, the sound of American sonars hammering his hull, and the roar of fighter jets flying overhead. In Savitsky's exhausted and stressed mind, the conclusion was obvious. War had already begun above. He truly believed that the Soviet Union and the United States were already destroying each other with atomic bombs, and that his submarine would be next to be sunk. Seized by panic and military pride, Savitsky yelled to his men, "Maybe the war has already started up there. We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all." He immediately ordered torpedo number 1, the nuclear torpedo, to be prepared for launch. The target? The aircraft carrier USS Randolph. According to Soviet protocol for the use of special weapons, the captain could not act alone. The launch required the confirmation of 3 high-ranking officers aboard the submarine. The first was Captain Savitsky himself. He had already said yes. The second was the Communist Party political officer, Ivan Maslenikov. Seeing the chaos around him and believing the American attack was real, Maslenikov also gave his consent. The fate of the world now rested entirely in the hands of the third man. That man was Vasily Arkhipov. He was not just the second-in-command of the B-59. He was the commander of the entire submarine flotilla that had left the Arctic, meaning he held equal hierarchical weight to the captain. Arkhipov was an experienced man, famously cool under pressure. Just a year earlier, he had survived a horrific radiation accident aboard the infamous K-19 submarine, where he helped contain a nuclear reactor meltdown at the cost of his own health. He knew the invisible horror of atomic energy firsthand. While Captain Savitsky screamed orders through the smoke and suffocating heat, Arkhipov remained calm. He analyzed the situation with pure military logic. He argued that if the Americans wanted to sink the submarine, they would have used real, lethal depth charges, not small, intermittent detonations. He realized this was an intimidation tactic to force them to surface, not an act of declared war. A fierce argument erupted in the submarine's command center. Savitsky insisted on the attack, citing the honor of the Soviet Navy and the necessity of self-defense. Arkhipov dug his heels in, flatly refusing to authorize the use of the torpedo. The tension was almost physical. The air was heavy, and the sailors stared at the 3 officers, knowing their lives hung on that debate. If Arkhipov gave in for a single second, the torpedo would be fired. The USS Randolph and the American destroyers would be vaporized in a fraction of a second. In response, the United States would trigger its plan for total nuclear war against the Soviet Union. Thousands of missiles would cross the skies. Cities like Moscow, Washington, New York, and Leningrad would vanish in minutes. The subsequent nuclear winter would starve billions to death. Humanity, as we knew it, would have ended right there, on that bleak Saturday in 1962. But Arkhipov did not yield. With his authority and a steady voice, he calmed the captain down. He convinced Savitsky that the only rational move was to bring the submarine to the surface, open communications, and assess the actual geopolitical situation. And so it was done. The B-59 slowly rose to the surface of the Caribbean Sea, emerging right in the middle of the American fleet. When the Soviet sailors finally opened the hatches and breathed the fresh night air, they saw that the American destroyers kept their distance, illuminating the submarine with searchlights, but without firing a single shot. There was no war. The world was still intact. The Americans offered assistance, which was proudly refused by the Soviets, and the B-59 began its long, slow journey back home, escorted by U.S. naval forces. What makes this story even more staggering is the fact that it remained an absolute secret for 4 decades. When the crew returned to the Soviet Union, they were not welcomed as heroes who had saved the world. On the contrary, Soviet military leaders were deeply disappointed that the submarines had been detected and forced to surface by the Americans. One admiral even remarked that it would have been better if they had gone down with their ships. The truth about the nuclear torpedo and Archipov's refusal only came to light in 2002, during a conference in Havana that brought together historians and veterans of the crisis, 40 years after the event. It was only then that the world understood just how close it had come to total annihilation. Thomas Blanton, who was then the director of the U.S. National Security Archive, uttered a phrase that perfectly sums up that moment. A guy called Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. Vasily Arkhipov passed away in 1998 at the age of 72, due to complications caused by the radiation he suffered on the K 19 years earlier. He died as an ordinary citizen, without grand global public honors, statues, or international peace prizes. He never boasted about what he did, viewing his actions simply as doing his duty as a naval officer. The story of the B-59 is a chilling and urgent reminder of how complex military power structures, a lack of communication, and extreme pressure can corner world leaders into a dead end. Ultimately, the survival of our species was not guaranteed by complex peace treaties or the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Humanity survived because, in the darkest moment of the Cold War, inside a suffocating submarine under enemy pressure, one man had the courage to keep a cool head, look into the eyes of death, and say no. Historical context. The B-59 incident occurred on the exact same day an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, killing pilot Rudolph Anderson. That Saturday, October 27, 1962, became known in history as Black Saturday, widely considered the closest humanity has ever come to its own self-destruction.